US Embassy thing.
Vocabulary,
I'm not being nerdy, I'm being correct, damn it.
Vocabulary and spelling so close to the bits. Oh, my goodness. And chemistry. It's all chemistry, though, isn't it? Vocabulary and spelling is also chemistry.
So go out and buy the book, folks. I'm sure it'll be a good read.
What else does she talk about apart from what other crazy things is she
We don't even have enough time to get into it. But I have to say it's been a treat to be filling in for Wallace and have the company of you, Catherine Graham, the company of you, Alan Blackman. Thank you very much. Just a little bit of feedback before we do go to Lisa Owen at Checkpoint on scams. I kept a telephone scammer on the phone and dealt to them, says one texter, with the smoke alarm into the earpiece. Very satisfying.
Good.
On workplace dress, Tom says clothing standards for work are a human affectation that promotes division, feelings of inadequacy for those that can't meet those standards, and some of the worst aspects of consumerism. However, dressing to attract a partner is a bit more forgivable. Thank you, Tom.
Good luck with that, Tom.
Yes, well done. And on CCTV footage, I had my wallet stolen late December from my car, was used at 2 petrol stations, and police obtained video, and the guy is now on remand in Christchurch. Well done, police in Nelson.
Oh, wow.
And finally, kia ora, I am 88 years old.
Oh, no.
I know where this is going.
And actively involved in the community. I do a lot of research on my computer and am on Substack and LinkedIn.
Better than me. That's amazing. Kia ora to you, Nana.
Thank you all so much. Alan and Catherine, it's been a pleasure. Thank you all so very much for your texts and your emails. Thanks to our guests. Looking forward to being with you on the panel tomorrow. Ka kite anō.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, Rumpty student rentals with high price tags, a side of mould and sickness to boot. Welcome to the start of the vasty year. A housing advocate is live. Health experts want any chance of a tobacco tax freeze stubbed out. Road user charges are on the way for electric vehicles. We talk to an EV Uber driver, and we'll cross live to Gaza, where access to some hospitals is cut off and a UN compound has been hit in a tank strike. Back home, a day at the beach is a Kiwi classic, but it is not access all areas for everyone. And can we get a rat check in aisle 3, please? The rodent alert at a South Island supermarket. Yum yum. You can watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. A 10-year-old girl from Australia has died after being swept down a creek in Fiordland National Park. Emergency services were alerted shortly after 11:30 this morning after the girl fell into the Marion Creek. Adam Burns reports.
The 10-year-old girl had been holidaying with her family from Australia when she fell into the fast-moving Marion Creek. Police initially reported a young person was swept down the Hollyford River. Southland Area Commander Inspector Mike Bowman says the girl was found a short time after she fell in. CPR was performed and a doctor was flown to the scene. However, she was unable to be revived. Inspector Bowman says his team is still in the early stages of an investigation into the tragedy.
A health advocate says a freeze on the inflation-adjusted tax for tobacco will just see more people taking up the habit. Associate Health Minister Casey Costello has sought advice on a 3-year freeze on the tax. Health Coalition Aotearoa co-chair Boyd Swinburne says it's a ridiculous proposal.
This proposal from Costello to put a 3-year freeze on this inflation-adjusted excise tax is essentially meaning that tobacco is going to get relatively cheaper over the next 3 years because it won't be keeping pace with the rest of inflation.
Professor Swinburne is calling on the Prime Minister to strip Ms Costello, who is a New Zealand First MP, of her Associate Minister role. Residents in the Wellington suburb of Kandala have been left shaken after an unexplained death overnight in the well-heeled neighbourhood. Emergency services were called to the house on Baroda Street just before midnight. One neighbour says police have been going door to door asking residents of the cul-de-sac if they'd noticed any unusual activity.
It's pretty scary. Yeah, just you wouldn't we was talking to other neighbours around the back that were even closer than us, and they're like, we were up at that time, how we didn't hear anything. That's like, we should be able to hear these sort of things because you can hear everything on the street. But just having something like that happen, doesn't feel too good.
The neighbour says a woman lived alone in the house at the centre of the investigation. Real NZ says its tourist cruise ship that ran aground in Fiordland will remain out of service until it's deemed safe. The Fiordland navigator made a distress call after running aground near Crooked Arm and Doubtful Sound around 6 o'clock last night, with 57 guests on board for an overnight trip. Maritime New Zealand has launched an investigation, as has the Transport Accident Investigation Commission and Real NZ. Real NZ Acting Chief Executive Paul Norris says all evacuated guests were accommodated in Te Anau. He says commercial divers have conducted an underwater assessment and they're waiting for the results. A new report by the Independent Children's Monitor has found that Oranga Tamariki doesn't know whether children in its care are receiving annual health and dental checkups. The report is the second in-depth review by Aroturuki Tamariki on a specific aspect of the Oranga Tamariki system. Aroturuki Tamariki Chief Executive Aaron Jones says while Oranga Tamariki doesn't provide medical services, it does have an obligation to meet national care standards.
Research shows that tamariki and care have poorer health outcomes, and that's why it's really important that they have an annual health check as the first step towards making sure that they get the help that they need.
Aaron Jones says Oranga Tamariki needs to have a better awareness of whether essential checks are taking place. And Niwa says Cyclone Kirili could help intensify the rainfall expected to hit New Zealand over the weekend. Schools have been closed and flights cancelled in Australia as the Category 1 cyclone bears down on far north Queensland. Niwa forecaster Chris Brandolino says the moisture brought by Kirili can enhance the rain already predicted to hit New Zealand. He says people should keep a close eye on the weather forecast in coming days. To sport now, and the South Africa cricket side accept they're inexperienced but are railing against the underdogs tag ahead of their 2-test series against New Zealand. 8 members of the squad have never played test cricket, among them skipper Neil Bland. The bulk of the Proteas' first choice test lineup has remained at home to play in the domestic T20 competition. Coach Shukri Conrad says their lack of experience has galvanised the touring group, who are far from second-rate.
I don't think any South African likes to be regarded as an underdog, and we're certainly not assuming that underdog tag. I don't think any battle between New Zealand and South Africa, both on the cricket and rugby field, I need to slip that rugby in there, both cricket and rugby, we certainly don't ever see ourselves as underdogs.
The Proteas have a 3-day warm-up match against a New Zealand 11 starting on Monday, before the first test against the Black Caps in Tauranga on February 4th. Coco Gauff faces a familiar foe in the Australian Tennis Open semi-finals tonight. The ASB Tennis Classic winner and 4th seed will play 2nd-seeded Belarusian Aryna Sabalenka, who she beat in last year's US Open final.
Aryna, it's always a tough match with her. I think she's playing really well this tournament. And obviously that US Open final was tough. And I think it's going to be a tough match. I think these are the later stages of the Grand Slam.
And Auckland golfer Ryan Fox has had a mixed day as he made his debut as a full-time US PGA Tour member. Fox had 5 birdies and 3 bogeys at the latest tour event in San Diego, with a 2-under par 70 to be tied for 48th, 6 shots off the lead. Koinanga Pitupitu Kōrero. That's the news.
The government looks into easing the costs for smokers.
I'm looking at the group of New Zealanders that are addicted to tobacco.
Trump takes New Hampshire.
They want this to turn into a Biden v. Trump rematch as quickly as possible. They are essentially announcing Donald Trump as the candidate already.
And would you put salt in your cuppa?
By adding salt to a cup of tea, you're probably trying to reduce the bitterness that's coming through. So you've got problems with your tea leaves.
Spilling the tea. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Taihape, cloudy with scattered showers, clearing from Wairarapa and Taihape this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning, then becoming fine. For the remainder of Te Ika Maui, the North Island, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and evening north of Taumaru Nui and again tomorrow in Northland. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine, isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Westland and Fiordland, fine, but a few showers in Fiordland, turning to rain tonight. Rain spreading north tomorrow afternoon with heavy falls in the evening. North Otago and Dunedin, cloudy with the odd shower today, fine tomorrow, but a few spots of rain at night. Central Otago, Clutha and Southland, fine with high cloud. Scattered rain developing for a time this evening and again tomorrow evening. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. Rain developing this evening, then easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. The time is coming up to 8 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Kia ora rā e ho. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint Te Tēnei Rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Auckland and Wellington University students say they're constantly getting sick from cold, damp and mouldy flats that they're paying exorbitant rents for. The start of the uni year is just weeks away and a shortage of rental accommodation means some have no choice but to move into dingy digs, sometimes far away from uni. And as Bella Craig reports, there's concern about the effect it's having on their health and their studies.
And I would say like 70 of the places we viewed had some form of mould. One place even had like grass or weeds growing through the wall.
70 flat viewings later, this University of Auckland student finally found a place that wasn't ridden with mould. It follows a year living with 6 others in damp and mouldy conditions in a flat in Grey Lynn, which cost her $247 a week.
There's been heaps of mould issues, and even though we try and keep the place well ventilated and our landlord did give us a dehumidifier, there was still like just heaps of mould everywhere, and all of us have been sick for a large portion of the year just because of that, especially during winter when we couldn't have like the windows open. That it would just be a constant rotation between the 6 of us with someone being sick always, and that just kept going around and around.
Her story is far from unique. This Victoria University of Wellington student paid $230 a week for a room in Kelburn, which she shared with 5 others. She says she and her flatmates were on a never-ending rota of illness due to the damp and mould permeating the building.
I was sick every other weekend, vomiting, I had temperatures.
Sickness affected her studies and often prevented her from going to work. There was also a constant battle with mould.
I used to get quite a bit of mould on my curtains and on my roof. There was one time when I had to mop mould off my roof because it was really bad.
Like all the students Checkpoint spoke to, the student wished to remain anonymous due to the fear of being blacklisted by landlords. She has since left the Kelburn flat and is now looking for new accommodation. But due to the price and huge demand for central Wellington rentals, she's having to look further afield.
They're all like in Brooklyn or on Mount Vic, which is like honestly like a wee way away from Pipitea, and I want to be somewhere closer.
Victoria University of Wellington student Ollie says the flat he is currently living in would not be affordable if there weren't couples sharing rooms.
And if you're relying on people to live in the same room to be able to afford a place, then not a great scenario for your rent affordability.
And he hasn't been impressed with his landlord's conduct.
There was mould build up over the last year, which our landlords decided to paint over in the bathrooms because our ventilation is very poor, which means that, especially in winter, and people have warm showers, the bathrooms don't vent properly, and then mould does build up.
Auckland University Students Association President Alan Shaker says that the impacts of bad housing were exacerbated by COVID.
Particularly now where we're moving into a period of education where a lot of it is done at home, a lot of it is done online. If you don't have a warm, safe, adequate house, it makes it very, very difficult to watch your lectures. It makes it very, very difficult to sleep at night.
According to the Tenancy Tribunal, complaints about health standards made up nearly 30% of all disputes last year, up 4.5% from 2021. Dr. Lucy Telfer-Barnard is a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Otago's Public Health Department. She says the health impacts of poor quality housing cannot be overstated.
Even before COVID, we were seeing a lot of hospitalisations from poor housing conditions each year. Around 54,000 adults and then 28,000 children. And those would be for a range of housing conditions. And then within that, even just from cold, damp housing, we would see about 6,000 hospitalisations a year.
And the impacts aren't only on physical health.
We do see this mental health epidemic amongst young people, and there is very strong evidence for association between poor housing and poor mental health. The reality is that our housing stock is poor, and there is a massive amount of work still required to be done to bring it up to the standards that we think it's reasonable for us to expect.
And that from Ballacraig. Well, joining us now is the president of Renters United, Geordie Rogers. Kia ora, Geordie.
Kia ora.
Weeds and grass growing through walls. I mean, how are landlords getting away with this?
I mean, it is really quite embarrassing that we're letting people get away with this in New Zealand, but ultimately the reality is the framework we have for managing these issues doesn't actually empower tenants to speak up. We heard in the story there that people were ashamed to even speak on the news, not even confront their landlord for the fear of being blacklisted. And that fear only grows when you have to be in this confrontational environment where it's you versus them in a courtroom. So we really are still seeing a lot of renters choosing not to say anything, because it does ultimately come down to having somewhere to live, or having somewhere to live that's incredibly mouldy.
The examples that we heard in Bella's piece there, do you think they're the exception to the norm, or are they the norm now?
I really wish they were the exception to the norm. For many students, and even for many renters who are raising families or have multiple generations living in one house, this certainly is common. And the healthy home standards, in theory, were supposed to abolish all of this, but unfortunately, while the framework for making a home healthy is there, the enforcement mechanisms haven't followed through. And so we're not seeing as much compliance as we originally would have hoped.
Tell me how it is working and how you know it's not being policed properly.
So when we talk to lots of different renters, one of the issues that they do find is that they're aware of their rights. They know what should and should not be happening in their home. But the difficulty is the amount of information they have to collect and process in order to go to the tribunal. And when we look at the cases that are coming through Citizens Advice Bureau and community law, there are far more cases that don't even make it to the tribunal because people do have a fear that either they'll be kicked out, especially with the return of 90-day notices, or they won't be able to find somewhere next time.
So what needs to happen then?
We've seen some projects, especially in the Wellington City Council, where the council is taking more responsibility in this place and providing more resources for renters enforcing their rights. Ultimately, the place that should be coming from is the central government. The rental warrant of fitness pilot, which also happened to happen in Wellington, shows that it can be really effective to have an independent person assessing the quality of that home instead of someone who's involved as either the landlord or the tenant.
A lot of the people spoken to there are obviously students, and I'm wondering, do you think there is still this kind of idea that in some way roughing it as a varsity student is a rite of passage and kind of suck it up, buttercup?
Yeah, there certainly is an aspect of that. I mean, very recently I was speaking to someone who said they just put on another jacket, and I mean, that sounds kind of comedical and it's kind of lighthearted, but like Lucy was saying, we know the effects of that are actually hospitalisations. That is, children who are going to hospital for entirely preventable conditions. So it's really not just tough it out, because we know that toughing it out leads to hospitalisations. What we can do is actually be looking to be a far better country that provides fantastic warm and dry houses. But to do that, we do actually have to point the finger and say, look, it's not okay to rent out a mouldy home, and actually we won't allow you to do it.
So what's your message to the government, who is said previously it's kind of evening the balance back up between renters and landlords?
I don't think I've spoken to a renter yet who believes it's going to get better for them. They don't see a future where they can own a home, and they don't see rents coming down. Even the most recent stats show that rents aren't coming down after all the government's proposed changes. And so really it is, if you look at any other successful country where people are allowed to rent their homes, it's affordable, it's healthy, they all have proper regulation, much like any other industry that is significant in people's lives. And there's no reason we shouldn't do that in New Zealand. We're not the special country where everyone is nice, unfortunately. There are people who are out to make a profit, and we should as a country stand up and say that that's not acceptable.
Appreciate your time, Geordie. That's Geordie Rogers, who is the president of Renters United. 17 minutes past 5. Interested in your feedback on that one. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. What's your experience searching for a rental? The quality, attitude of the landlord, and the price you're expected to pay. What do you get? Love to hear from you. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Auckland Transport's rollout of raised pedestrian crossings may have hit a speed bump. One in the central city suburb of Grey Lynn has cost close to $500,000, and a dozen so-called signalised crossings have cost the agency $6 million. Mayor Wayne Brown has reportedly accused AT of losing the plot, with claims the capital is doing the same work for way less. Joining us now is Auckland Transport CEO Dean Kimpton. Kia ora, Dean. Have you lost the plot?
Oh, of course we haven't. And look, as I've said many times to a variety of media audiences, we are seriously comparing apples and oranges. What the example is at Williamson Ave is not just a level crossing, but a whole range of other things that we've done there to improve safety for people walking and riding in that environment.
OK, so this is the Grey Lynn crossing for those people who live outside of Auckland. Sell it to us then, Dean. Why is it so special at that price?
So for $490,000, you've got improvements in the drainage in that area, you've got improvements in the footpath and curb and channel, you've got improvements with a central island, you've got a whole range of things, including a crossing. If you go and compare like for like with what they did in Wellington, and one of the examples was High Tai, their cost for doing the improvements alongside of the level crossing was $500,000. And yes, they put in a roundabout and they put in other things too, just like we put in other things at this location. So, look, we've got to be honest with ourselves and be like for like. If we did just a straight, simple level crossing in Auckland, exactly like a couple of the other examples were, our prices would be very similar.
Why can't you just do that then, Dean? Would it not be as effective?
We've got a dig once policy. So we want to come in, and if while we're there doing a level crossing, we're going to do the other things that also need to be done to improve that environment. And that is also a requirement and an expectation of every ratepayer and every person that lives in that location. So we're looking to do the right thing. And if we spent $500,000 getting it right, including all those other bits and pieces, and a crossing, that represents value for money. It's not gold-plated.
Because the thing is, this city is creaking under old infrastructure and the price of repairs. And when people hear that number, you can buy an apartment for that. So why can't you do it cheaper?
Oh, look, we are. We've invested a lot of time and effort. Just remember, this project is also an old one. It was designed in 2021, built in 22. This is 2024. Since that project was done, we've got a new approach, new management, a new board, we've got a new mayor, and we are scrutinising every single project, including all the level crossings, to make sure we do deliver value for money.
Do you reckon?
It's hard to put it at 25% of what it used to be, especially when we get a program of them and we get the efficiency. So we're absolutely gone in that direction. I give the assurance.
Dean, do you think some of your contractors may be extracting, the you-know-what? Are you getting ripped off by some people? They see AT coming and they go cha-ching.
Well, that might have been in the past, but look, we're working really hard to make sure that we're clear on what we want, that we're instructing our contractors clearly and getting that value for money. Of course we are. We're very aware of that, and we don't want to leave any stone unturned in getting the best price, but also the best outcome. We're talking about safety here. 7 people on average have died walking on our roads and footpaths every year over the last 5 years, and 350 to 400 people are injured. 90 of that are seriously injured every single year on Auckland roads, walking along the footpath or crossing them. I don't think that's good enough either. That's a high price.
So why don't you think that Mayor Wayne Brown is, seeing this the same way you are?
And Wayne and I talk regularly. So that's the first thing. And I think we're aligned on many of these things. But the thing that he has challenged us with, and I agree with, is demonstrate you've got the value for money. Demonstrate that you're getting the best dollar out of every project you're delivering. I agree with that, and we are doing it. This is an old project that's 2 years old. We're looking at every single one going forward to make sure we get the best value for money. That's got to be our assurance ratepayers, but it's got to be the thing that we stand up for.
Yeah, but he's bagging you in public, Dean. He says you lost the plot, so he clearly doesn't agree with what you're doing.
Yeah, I was disappointed in that because I don't agree with it, and I don't have to agree with it.
Right.
We lost the plot.
So do you think it's inappropriate that the mayor's saying that kind of stuff about you guys in public?
We've put public transport back. We've delivered our capital program. We can see increase in improvement, and demonstrable 30-point increase in improvement in reputation and confidence that we're listening and doing what Auckland has asked us to do. So I think, we've got an issue right now, which is a hot political one. I get that. I've given you the facts. And so I think in the round we've done a really good job. And I'm just
so to my question,
Dean, I
Dean,
can't control what's said.
Yeah. So about the appropriateness, do you think it's appropriate that he made those kind of comments publicly?
Look, that's his call. That's your question for him. I've got an organisation to lead here that's very focused on delivering awesome results for Auckland.
And
so
another
I'm
question,
not going to comment on Wayne.
Another question for you then, Dean. The prices that are going up on public transport. Yeah. People are hurting. Cost of living is still high. How do you justify that?
We've held prices on public transport for nearly 4 years, and at one point in time we actually halved them. So we've now got a situation where we have unfortunately had to increase them by about 6%, which is 20 to 40 cents per trip, in order to ensure that we can both fund the service but also pay our drivers more. So our costs have increased. We have needed to reflect that and offset the cost to the ratepayer and taxpayer funding the service with a slightly higher proportion from the user of the service. So we don't want to do it either, but we need to.
Thanks for your time, Dean. That's Dean Kimpton, who is Auckland Transport's CEO there. 23 minutes after 5. Let us know your thoughts on that one. What price for a raised pedestrian crossing? You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, don't forget you can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Interested in your thoughts on the quality of rentals, particularly if you are a varsity student, the cost of public transport in Auckland and the safety measures that Auckland Transport is spending some serious coin on. Have they lost the plot, as Mayor Wayne Brown reportedly has said? Time to go to the headlines now. Ko Evi anō tēnei.
Large numbers of Auckland and Wellington university students say they're constantly ill because they are living in damp and mouldy flats. One student said she'd found mould at about 70 flat viewings. The president of Renters United, Geordie Rogers, told Checkpoint it's embarrassing that New Zealand allows landlords to get away with such accommodation. Southland's Mayor Rob Campbell says the Fiordland River, where a 10-year-old girl died after being swept away this morning, is unforgiving. The child was pulled from the Marion Creek but couldn't be revived. Southland Area Commander Inspector Mike Bowman says she had been holidaying with her family from Australia. Advocacy group Health Coalition Aotearoa says freezing the inflation-adjusted tax for tobacco is a ridiculous proposal. Associate Health Minister Casey Costello of New Zealand First is seeking advice on a 3-year tax freeze. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission has launched a marine safety inquiry after a Fiordland tourist cruise ship ran aground last night with 57 passengers aboard. The Real New Zealand operated Fiordland navigator made a distress call near Crooked Arm in Doubtful Sound shortly after 6 o'clock. All the guests spent the night in Te Anau. And in Melbourne, a century-old statue of Captain James Cook has been cut down and a Queen Victoria monument covered in red paint in an apparent late-night protest ahead of Australia Day tomorrow. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Canterbury at Omarama, due to a crash, State Highway 8 is currently closed at the intersection with Lake Oho Road. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 to 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. South Africa's under-strength test team has touched down in New Zealand with a warning for the Black Caps. 8 of the touring squad have never played international cricket before, but the Proteas coach isn't buying into the underdog tag and says his side is full of confidence ahead of the first test next month. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Warning from the netballers. Should the Black Caps be wary of writing off South Africa ahead of the 2-test series?
Well, you're right there. With the front line, most of the frontline Proteas back in South Africa playing in the domestic T20 competition, it is quite easy to look at this squad and see, probably not too much international experience even for the players who have played international games. And so you question how competitive will this tour actually be, but the criticism for that has also come from former players, not necessarily New Zealand or South African players, but other big names in the sport as well have laid into some of the selection policies around this South African team. And New Zealand coach Gary Stead, when he was asked about it, he recognised that different teams will have different players these days, given the different demands on the different players, and not every team is always going to have your big names in it. And for everyone else's opinions, we've finally heard from Shukri Conrad, and this is his take on the side he's brought to New Zealand.
We've made peace with it a long time ago, and it's a conversation that's both well ventilated and discussed. So we're just here to make sure that we give ourselves the best chance of winning a test series against arguably one of the best teams in the world. So if anything, it's been used as a galvanizing agent. We've got guys here that are out to prove both themselves and that the strength of the Proteas not only lie in the top 11, but we definitely as a Proteas side, not as a second or third rate side.
And Conrad also used the opportunity today to bring up that traditional New Zealand-South Africa rivalry, not only in cricket but also in rugby, and said no South African side ever wants to be known as the underdog. So for any of these players, if they needed that extra motivation, pulling on that Proteas jersey, it's an opportunity for them to show what they've got and maybe put it to some of these people who have criticised this decision.
OK, cricket fans seem to be making the most of their home summer with another sellout confirmed, Felicity.
Yes, New Zealand Cricket have confirmed that the first test between the Black Caps and Australia at the Basin Reserve in Wellington, starting at the end of next month, is a sellout. So that's more than a month in advance, right? That all of these tickets have been sold out. And you've got to remember that the Australians are the World Test champions, so maybe some of that is promoted. People want to come out and see these types of players. That's what New Zealand Cricket is saying. The excitement and drama of an Australian series has drawn people in, but it's also that there are a few touring fans, several hundred of them will be coming for that. And if you're thinking about getting out to that Christchurch test, best hurry and get those tickets as well. That's closing in on being a sellout as well. And this has all come on the back of the Pakistan series, where 4 of the 5 games between the Black Caps and Pakistan were sellouts. That other 5th game there was Eden Park, where there were 20,000 fans there as well. So it has been a good summer for New Zealand cricket, and maybe some of the fans finally seeing some of the top players around in the country as well.
OK, we'll get some feedback on that one, Felicity. 2101 on text. Making the most of the cricket, heading out, getting your tickets. Let us know your thoughts. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and free on TV, so you can watch it, should it stay that way. Smelling a rat is one thing. Having a whopper actually scurrying by while you do a quick spot of grocery shopping is next level. Well, that was the reality for one Dunedin shopper recently. The Ministry for Primary Industries confirmed it's investigating an alleged rat problem at a Dunedin South supermarket following complaints. Woolworths admits its Andersons Bay Road store has recently seen increased pest activity, but it says it's got a comprehensive management plan with a specialist pest control contractor. The store declined our interview request, but Tammy Young describes coming face to face with one of the offenders at the supermarket.
So I was in the countdown. I was with my 2 kids. We were in the sort of fruit and veggie section, and I just out the corner of my eye caught the rat running sort of through the wine bottles. And I said quite loudly, "Was that a fin rat?" And next minute I had one of the countdown personal shoppers right beside me, asking me what I had seen. And all of a sudden, sort of 3 male countdown workers sort of reassuring me and it was okay and apologising and where did I see the rat? Yeah.
Tammy, can you describe the rat to me, please? I'm particularly interested in whether it looked chubby and well fed and how big you would say it was.
It was definitely living its best life in there. It was huge. It would have been at least, I would say, 25 centimetres long, and then tail on top of that. And yeah, it was quite a decent size, not a little baby rat at all.
Yeah, sometimes the tails are the worst thing, wiry,
yes.
little things. And you, I mean, what were you sort of thinking when you saw this? It is a supermarket after all.
I was actually in there. We were going to get like some fresh bread and a hot chicken and the deli salads, and that was going to be dinner done. And we did not get any of that because it kind of came from the direction like it had been in a bakery and ran through.
So it put you off your dinner, basically.
Pretty much. So we just stuck to sort of sealed items after that.
So how have you felt about subsequently shopping at that store?
I have not been back to that one, but it's not probably my regular store to go to.
And what is word on the street and in shopping circles about whether there have been other sightings, Tammy?
I've talked to a few people this morning, clients of my own, and everybody's been pretty horrified at the fact, and I mean, you understand there might be the occasional one, but the fact that it hasn't been dealt with and it's a bigger problem than just one chubby one running around.
Ick.
Yeah.
How did the kids react?
Oh, my boy actually was pretty excited about it, to be honest. He spotted it for the second time when they went looking for it. He spotted it, I think, into some more wine bottles in the corner.
So the staff were in hot pursuit, were they, Tammy?
Yes, they were there within seconds of me seeing it.
Did they say anything to you about whether there had been any other incidents or whether they were aware that there was a rodent issue?
No, they were just very apologetic. I guess probably trying to make sure I didn't go telling other people or posting it on social media.
Yeah, whoops. Let us know your feedback on that one. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Oh, rats, quite distracting. Anyway, 27 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa NINA ko Nona Pountier. Nona joins us in the studio. Working from home, Nona, still popular, but apparently fewer options for employees. What's happening?
Well, it turns out that jobs for white-collar workers, and that includes defense contractors, tech contractors, admin, office support, consulting, and so on. Those people are definitely being offered options to work from home, and it's quite popular in Wellington. About 13% of the roles advertised for Wellington workers offer a work-from-home option. So obviously, down in the capital, they like to work from home. And that's followed by Auckland at 11%, but less elsewhere. For example, only 3% of the jobs on the West Coast have that option. 4% in Southland, Hawke's Bay offering some flexible working, but not a lot compared with these the major cities. So it turns out if you've got a white-collar job, you're more likely to be able to work from home, whereas if you don't, well, you got to turn up.
Takeaways, right? Restaurant brands. It says New Zealand sales are going strong despite inflation and rising costs.
That's right. So restaurant brands, they have a number of brands in 4 regions. So the New Zealand region, Australia, Hawaii, and California. They have KFC, the chicken, Taco Bell, tacos, Carl's Jr.'s, which is burgers, and Pizza Hut pizza. So this is all fast food.
Thanks for the translation.
No problem at all. I just thought I'd pass it along. Well, anyways, New Zealand's fourth quarter sales rose 8%. That was well ahead of other regions where, for example, Australia's rose only 2.4% sales. So obviously those people are holding on to their money a bit tighter, perhaps. What else do we have? Hawaii actually fell 1.3%, and California fell 4.9%. So they're not eating the takeaways as much as New Zealanders are.
What's your theory on this one, Nona? I wonder if people depressed by the cost of living are wanting to give themselves a little treat. So it might be something like that. Like lipsticks during the global financial crisis.
Well, that's true. But I think that from all the years I've been covering this particular company, people love their KFC in New Zealand. And I think it's the chicken that's doing it. Because people like chicken. I think it's chicken. I don't know that it's pizza or burgers or even tacos. I think it's the chicken. That's what I think. Anyways, the market liked this result because this was the sales for the fourth quarter. Restaurant Brands expects to reach their net profit guidance. Now, this is interesting, though. So, sales to the end of December, $1.32 billion. The profit range, between 12 and 16 million. That, to me, doesn't sound like a big return for a lot of chicken and pizza and so on. But anyway, the market liked it, rose 1.5%. The shares overall, the index ended up 0.25%. That was a 33-point gain to 11,890. But the dollar was a little changed at 61.1 US cents, 92.9 Australian, 48.1 British pence. There you go.
Thank you, Nona, for the menu of business news there. Nona Peltier. Health experts are outraged at a minister's proposal to bring in a 3-year freeze on tobacco excise tax. Associate Health Minister Casey Costello has sought advice on a 3-year freeze on the inflation-adjusted tax on smoking tobacco products. The minister says the tax affects addicted smokers who can come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. An anti-smoking advocacy group wants her to be stripped of her health duties altogether. Jordan Dunn has the story.
A freeze on the excise tax would mean the price of smoking tobacco products would not be increased based on inflation for 3 years. Professor Boyd Swinburne, co-chair of Health Coalition Aotearoa, says all it would do is make the products more accessible.
This proposal from Costello to put a 3-year freeze on this inflation-adjusted excise tax is essentially meaning that tobacco is going to get relatively cheaper over the next 3 years because it won't be keeping pace with the rest of inflation.
He says it seems a crazy suggestion for an Associate Minister of Health.
She's acting more like a minister for the tobacco industry.
He wants the PM to act.
Health Coalition's calling for her to be replaced as Associate Minister of Health, given all of these policies she's come out with, which are really supporting the tobacco industry's position.
In documents revealed to RNZ, Ms Costello was asked if she wanted advice on the freeze for January, to which she circled yes and signed in December. The Associate Minister says it's not a proposal, it's just information gathering.
We're dealing with just under 300,000 people who are daily smokers. They are now addicted smokers. And I'm committed to looking at the very best options to getting those people away from smoking.
Aisha Viral says she needs to come clean with her intentions.
The Ministry will provide advice on things the Minister requests. And we've known for some time that New Zealand First has had a policy against increases in the tobacco excise. And the Minister is standing on very shaky ground there, saying that she's sympathetic to smokers and their addiction. The issue there is that smokers in New Zealand have a range of affordable and free alternatives to get them off this deadly product.
Letitia Harding, Chief Executive of the Asthma and Respiratory Foundation New Zealand, says the freeze on tax is an unbelievable suggestion.
I think it is outrageous. It's as outrageous as not reducing the number of tobacco outlets, not supporting very low nicotine content in cigarettes, and not supporting the banning of the smoke-free generation. So this is just another thing that is completely outrageous.
The coalition government has already announced it will scrap world-leading smoke-free legislation. Ms Harding says this would be another hit to the smoke-free movement if it goes ahead.
It feels like more of a win for big tobacco. That's the scary thing. We're getting down to extremely low levels of people who smoke in New Zealand, around sort of that 7% for adults who smoke daily. And we want to encourage people to quit smoking, of course, but we don't want people to take it up.
Finance Minister Nicola Willis declined to be interviewed because the proposal is not under consideration.
It is 20 minutes away from 6. Let's get to some of your feedback now on student flats and the condition. Not great, according to some of the people we've talked to. This listener says, my son's flat in Dunedin had mushrooms growing in it. The tenants were all sick. It's immoral. Landlord wouldn't clean the mould off the 15-foot stud. This one, my daughter ended up flatting in a house we used to party at 30 years ago in Dunedin. We were shocked to find the carpet was the same, wallpaper the same, lack of ventilation and mould. Same old corrugated iron fence too, freezing cold. The price of the room was $185 a week. 5 years ago, the landlord has been making bank with very little investment. I'd like to see more independent inspections so those who should be prosecuted are prosecuted. This one from a landlord who says, in my experience, tenants just don't clean windows, curtains or bathrooms properly. People don't know how to ventilate their homes with opening windows, doors, using extractor fans and dehumidifiers and wiping condensation off windows when it occurs. It is not rocket science, but there is some science to it, they say. Greg says, we have flats. The cost of an HRV system is not huge. Even injected insulation in walls is under 1% ANZ loan. No excuses for landlords with mouldy homes. And a couple on Auckland Transport. Another boondoggle from Auckland Transport. 4 raised pedestrian crossings and a few hundred metres on View Road between Esplanade and Dominion Road in Mount Eden. Slows the buses down, damages the suspension after they roll around the mini roundabout on the corner and makes the ride very uncomfortable for the passengers, difficult for the drivers. 4 great wins for stupidity, this person reckons. And this one before we move on, if I bought $470,000 worth of overpriced pre-mixed concrete, I'd have enough to concrete every crossing in New Zealand with some to spare. Keep it coming. Homai o whakaro 2101 on text, tweet us at checkpointrnz or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines now with Evie. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Investigators say a Fiordland tourist cruise ship took on water after its hull was breached when it ran aground last night. The Real NZ Fiordland navigator had 57 passengers aboard when it made a distress call near Crooked Arm in Doubtful Sound around 6 o'clock. Transport Accident Investigation Commission investigators plan to be on site tomorrow and over the weekend to gather evidence. Police have charged a 28-year-old man after a fatal crash near Queenstown last month. 2 cars collided on State Highway 6 near Queenstown on the 16th of December. 1 person died and another was seriously injured. The man's charged with excess blood alcohol causing death. Oranga Tamariki says it knows it needs to improve the way it records children's health records. A new report by the Independent Children's Monitor has found that Oranga Tamariki doesn't know whether children in its care are receiving annual health and dental checkups. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has been unable to find out how confidential papers on the government's Fair Pay Agreements repeal legislation were leaked to media. An investigation was launched last month. And the US aviation regulator says it will allow Boeing's 737 MAX 9 jets to resume flying after inspections are completed. The Federal Aviation Administration grounded 171 of the planes after an unused door broke away mid-flight. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, a crash at Omarama in Canterbury has closed State Highway 8 at the intersection with Lake Oho Road. There is currently no time frame for reopening there. Our next news and weather are at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Evie. As you just heard in the news, a report has found Oranga Tamariki doesn't know whether the children in care are receiving annual health and dental checkups. The report by the Independent Children's Monitor found some are being given pain relief instead of a proper checkup. Crystal Gibbons reports.
Children in care are supposed to have a health check and see a dentist every year, but this report has found that's not happening. A support worker told the Independent Children's Monitor a girl needing 14 fillings and a boy needing urgent extractions were given pain relief instead of a dental appointment. A social worker reported that when dealing with trauma, basic health needs often get forgotten. But Independent Children's Monitor, Araturuki Chief Executive Aaron Jones, says Oranga Tamariki has an obligation to look after the health needs of the children in its care.
Research shows that, tamariki in care have poorer health outcomes, and that's why it's really important that they have an annual health check as the first step towards making sure that they get the help that they need. Unfortunately, what our report shows is that Oranga Tamariki still don't know whether their kids in care are receiving annual health checks or are receiving annual checks with the dentist.
A one-off data match with Te Whasha Order found 93% of tamariki are enrolled with a GP, but that may not factor in children who have moved. Aaron Jones says accurate and up-to-date information is important so children don't slip through the cracks.
The provision of dental checks is largely carried out through schools. And of course, if a young person is moving, they can easily miss the cycle. So they may not be at the school when that dental nurse is present. And so unless you're checking with the caregiver and with the child to find out whether they've seen the dentist, you just don't know.
The advocacy group Voice Whakaromai wants Oranga Tamariki to be held accountable for not tracking basic healthcare requirements. Its spokesperson, Tupa Ehrlich, a former child in care, says the lack of data held by Oranga Tamariki is deeply worrying.
We know that when children come from backgrounds of trauma, their overall health and well-being is already at risk and impacted by their early life experiences, and I think it's just totally unacceptable that the government is once again failing to ensure that the healthcare and dental needs are being met for children in their own care.
Better data recording and information sharing is something Oranga Tamariki spokesperson Nicolette Dixon admits they need to work on.
We absolutely need to make sure that children are identified as being in care in the health system, so that involves both Oranga Tamariki sharing that information every time, and it also involves ensuring that health systems have ways of making children visible within their own systems.
Dental Association Chief Executive Mo Amso says it's surprising that children in care are missing out on dental care as it's free for under 18s.
The main reason for these children not accessing care, I'd imagine, is social barriers. And that's usually what Oranga Tamariki will be tasked with, is managing their social barriers. So it's surprising to know that children in the care of, say, a social worker are still not able to access what's already funded care.
Later this year, the Independent Children's Monitor will release a third report, this time looking at the implementation of recommendations after the review of the children's system response to abuse.
It is 12 minutes away from 6. Kia mo tuni mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to a bit of your feedback now on Auckland transport. This listener says they're out of control. No need to have a raised crossing at all the locations. Another person texting in with their support for Wayne Brown, saying the mayor is right. On the subject of student housing, lots of feedback coming in. Mum of Dunedin's student over the last 4 years, 3 terrible flats. How can you air out a home that gets no sun at all, that person says. Another says, a friend of mine has just given notice to move out of a property that had, after complaining about a few things, disgusting things, including a septic tank that needed repairing to the point it spilled all over the lawn. The owners didn't want to fix it properly, this person says, just did the absolute minimum. And they can say that they lied about meeting some of the healthy home requirements. Another says, my daughter was a uni student a couple of years ago in Wellington. Her first flat in Kelburn was in an old rundown house, had 2 stories above with both rented out to tenants. The flats were advertised as 2-bedroom, but on viewing it was clear it was 1 bedroom and a lounge. They were so desperate for a flat they took it, with one of them living in the living room. Flat was 40 square metres in total, turned out to be mould ridden. Windows didn't open properly and there was no form of heating. They left a window ajar one day to try and get some air circulating, and the wind got up and ripped the entire window off its hinges. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. An Uber driver who's gone electric says he's happy to pay road user charges, but if the government wants to keep driving people towards cleaner greener options, it's got to carve the costs up fairly. From April, light electric vehicles that have previously been exempt from road user charges will have to pay. The cost, $76 per 1,000 kilometres. By comparison, a much heavier diesel truck weighing between 3,500 and 6,000 kilograms currently pays $82 every 1,000 kilometres. The Transport Minister says the new charges are about fairness and equity and will ensure all road users are contributing to road maintenance. A Wellington electric Uber driver who charts his travels on TikTok, Piram Koi, says he's got no problem paying. The question is, what's fair?
Absolutely. I think it is fair because we need to pay our way of road maintenance. We use the roads as well. I think it's only fair. Absolutely.
What do you think of the amount that the Minister has laid out? In your situation, I think it's going to be about, $75 per 1,000 kilometres?
Yep, so it's about $76 per 1,000, but then you've got the admin fee of around $13, so it goes up to about $89 per 1,000 kilometres. So if we break that down to per kilometre, that's about 8.9 cents per kilometre. But if we have a look at how much the petrol tax is, that's actually 3.9 cents per kilometre. So I'm not sure if EV users should be paying more or the same or less.
What about if you compare it to, say, bigger vehicles like trucks who use road user charges? How is what they want to charge you compared to what they're already charging some of those vehicles?
The bigger vehicles?
Yeah, trucks, Yeah,
the ones that are over, I think it's 5,000 or 6,000 kg, have to pay $89 or $90 per. So it's about the same, and I think that they'd probably do more damage to the roads.
So what would be a fair price for you then, if you think that it's a bit toppy to be paying?
A fair price for me would be as close as possible to what petrol tax is, or less, because I feel that we have a commitment to climate change in this country. And if you're going to have rucks that are higher than petrol tax, then it's going to put people off buying an electric vehicle.
What do you think it's going to do to Uber charges too? Because that's what you use your car for, right? You're an Uber driver.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yep. I guess, the thing is that it's still going to be a lot cheaper than a petrol car. And the amount of the kilometres that an Uber driver does, it's always going to be worth it. The rucks, it is more than what petrol is, but the price of petrol is a lot more. And also not having to do any maintenance on the car. For example, I've had the car for 28 months. I've done 135,000 kilometres. And the only maintenance I've needed to do apart from tyres was just take it in for a service that cost me $390.
Whoa!
Now, compared to a petrol car, we're looking at, every 10,000 kilometres you have to do a service. That's 13 services I haven't had to do, which could be anywhere between $600 to $1,000 depending on what work needs to be done.
Those are some serious kilometres. How many? Break it down for us. What would you do sort of on average a week?
Anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500. It really depends because my situation, my hours are very inconsistent. I do Uber purely because my son's at school. So I left my corporate job 2 and a bit years ago to do Uber. My hours right now, it's school holiday, so I'm doing maybe 15 to 20 hours a week at the moment. But once he goes back to school next week, I'll go back to full-time, which would be about 1,250 to 1,500 kilometres in a week. And that will cost me maybe 100 to 120 in road user charges. But I'm just trying to think how I'm going to buy the road user charges, because if I buy 1,000 at a time, I'm going to have to pay the admin fee every time. But if I buy, say, 10,000 at a time, I'm going to have to pay that once.
So you make the point about the fact that a car your size doesn't do the same sort of damage as a bigger truck. You're helping the environment because you're going fully electric. In your view, does this government need to, provide a little bit of a sweetness still for the transition to electric and hybrid vehicles by, going a bit easier on the road user charges for you guys?
It should be on par with petrol tax or cheaper. Just to, entice people to buy an electric vehicle, because the rebate that we had, that definitely got a lot more people to buy EVs. Just some sort of incentive, I believe, to help us go towards EV. And it's more about just our commitment to climate change.
I'm wondering, for people who are listening to this and not watching, I should say, you're sitting in a very nice car, Piram. What are you driving?
Oh, thank you. Tesla Model 3.
So I'm picking given the age you said your car was a little bit earlier, that you benefited from the clean car discount, did you?
Yes, I did.
So you've had your sweetener, haven't you, Piram?
Yeah, I got in pretty early. Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I think so. But again, it's part of the incentive to try and get people to drive EVs, right? But again, I'm more than happy to pay whatever the road user charges. I choose to live in this country, so I will abide by laws.
And that is Piram Koi. The beach day is a Kiwi classic, but for people in wheelchairs, accessible beaches are hard to come by. In Auckland, Takapuna is the only beach with a mat and accessible bathroom for wheelchair users. Their families are calling on the government to invest in making public places like beaches accessible to everyone. Maya Ingo has the story.
Travelling anywhere in or out of Auckland requires weeks of preparation for Kimberly Graham, whose son, Finlay, has cerebral palsy. On a hot day, she heads to Takapuna Beach, which has a changing place, making it one of Auckland's only accessible beaches.
It's fabulous, so it's right there. I was able to wheel the power chair in, wheel the beach wheelchair with the big wheels into there, hoist Finlay, change Finlay on the change bed into his swimming gear, shower him off afterwards, transfer him back into the beach wheelchair and enjoy the beach with everyone else.
Jen Hooper, the founder of Changing Places, a charity building fully accessible public bathrooms, estimates there are 20,000 New Zealanders who rely on them. They're designed for adults and children who need caregivers' help to be able to get out of their wheelchairs. People like Miss Hooper's daughter, Charlie.
If you imagine if the only toilet and bathroom that exists in all the world that you can use is the one that's in your house, how often would you go out?
There are 7 changing places in New Zealand. Only 2 are in Auckland. There are 3 in Hamilton, and Mount Maunganui and Hastings each have 1. But somewhere to change is only the first hurdle. Rachel Peterson has used a wheelchair her whole life and was determined this summer to get into the sun.
It's a Kiwi thing to do. It's a free thing to do. It's a way to exercise, be with your family and connect with nature and soul, or whichever way you want to put it. And it's not available to a huge percentage of our population. Just doesn't sit well with me.
Miss Peterson was surprised to find the surf club at Red Beach, where she lives, had a beach wheelchair free to use. A beach wheelchair can be taken on the sand even without a mat on the beach. Miss Peterson says reaching the water for the first time in 5 years was a phenomenal moment, and she thinks a beach wheelchair should be available in all 4 corners of Auckland.
In this day and age, with the amount of money that we pay in rates and taxes, and even from a ethics and human rights point of view as well as what's right, it's just crazy to me that there's not more will politically or council-wise to do a bit more about this.
Back in Takapuna, Miss Graham says Finlay's beach wheelchair was funded by the community, and without it, he wouldn't be able to reach the water.
They're not cheap. So what we would like to see more of is at some of our popular beaches that they not only have a changing place with a hoist, they also have a selection, like they do in Australia, a selection of beach wheelchairs, courtesy beach wheelchairs near the lifeguards.
Miss Graham says New Zealand's accessibility is lagging behind other countries, and she wants the government to invest in a network of changing places.
Can you imagine the freedom that would bring to people? It's not a nice to have, it's an essential thing to have.
An Auckland Council spokesperson says there are council-operated beach mats in place at Mission Bay and on Waiheke Island from Labour weekend until Easter. But they do not provide beach wheelchairs. Families like the Grahams want to enjoy a summer beach day just like everyone else. They say accessible bathrooms, beach wheelchairs and mats give them that freedom.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Investigators say the hull of a Fiordland tourist cruise ship was breached when it ran aground and took on water. The Real NZ's Fiordland navigator made a distress call after running aground near Crooked Arm in Doubtful Sound around 6 o'clock last night. 57 guests were on board for an overnight trip. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission has launched an inquiry. Maritime New Zealand and Real NZ are also investigating. The Commission's investigators plan to be on site tomorrow and over the weekend to gather evidence. They'll also interview people involved and witnesses and secure any photos, videos and location data on phones. Southland's mayor says the creek where a 10-year-old girl died after being swept away earlier today is an unforgiving stretch of water. Emergency services were called to Fiordland's Marion Creek shortly after 11:30 this morning after the girl fell in. The girl was found and rescued from the fast-moving water a short time later but was unable to be revived. Southland Mayor Rob Scott says it's a tragic outcome.
It's a pretty harsh environment out there. It's actually, we're in the middle of summer, but it is very cold out there too, and it's quite a strong flowing river. So it's not a nice, calm environment. But it is well frequented by visitors as well. It's a beautiful part of the world, but again, very sad that we've had this kind of outcome.
Southland Area Commander Inspector Mike Bowman says the girl had been holidaying with her family from Australia. An unexplained death overnight in a leafy Wellington neighbourhood, the second in the northern suburbs within 24 hours, has left residents shocked and uneasy. Emergency services were called to the house in Kandala just before midnight. Somya Bamanipati is there.
The body was removed from the scene at about 4:20 and taken away in a coroner's van. A police officer remains on guard outside the house at the centre of the investigation, with forensic staff seen coming and going throughout the day. Neighbours have told RNZ that a woman had lived there alone for many years. At one point today, there were 6 patrol cars in this quiet cul-de-sac, and police were going door to door questioning residents. Police have yet to make any comment about this death, or the earlier one in nearby Tawa.
Oranga Tamariki has confirmed one of its staff members forwarded a confidential document to someone outside the agency. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment had been investigating the leak of the Cabinet paper which contained advice on the government's Fair Pay Agreements repeal legislation. The investigation was unable to find out how the document was leaked to media. MB says it was told by Oranga Tamariki the paper was forwarded by mistake to an outside source. Oranga Tamariki was one of 18 agencies which were consulted on or sent a copy of the paper. Chief Executive Chapi Tekani says he's been assured by the person outside the agency who received the document that it was deleted. He says there is no evidence the Oranga Tamariki staff member sent the email or its attachments to media. Large numbers of Auckland and Wellington University students say they're living in damp and mouldy flats which are constantly making them sick. One student has told Checkpoint she had found mould at about 70 flat viewings she's attended, and a shortage of rental accommodation means some have no choice but to move into such poor quality accommodation, often a long distance from uni.
Especially during winter when we couldn't have the windows open, that it would just be a constant rotation between the 6 of us with someone being sick always, and that just kept going around and around.
Oranga Tamariki says it knows it needs to improve how it collects children's health records. A new report by the Independent Children's Monitor has found that Oranga Tamariki doesn't know whether the children in its care are receiving annual health and dental checkups. Oranga Tamariki spokesperson Nicolette Dixon says it's working on improving its systems. Advocacy group Voice Whakarongo Mai says Oranga Tamariki needs to be held accountable for not tracking basic healthcare requirements. And Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the government's redesign of its tax cuts is inclusive of more taxpayers. The Stage 3 tax cuts, which would have mainly helped the nation's highest earners, will now be modified to benefit lower and middle income earners from July. Anthony Albanese told the National Press Club it's the right decision amid cost of living pressures.
We are choosing a better way forward given the changed circumstances.
We are doing the right thing for the right reasons, with a plan that delivers a tax cut for every taxpayer.
Under the changes, most taxpayers will receive an extra $800. Koinanga pito pito kōrero. That's the news.
This Saturday morning, Canadian writer Anne Michaels on her new novel, which asks big questions like, we know life is finite. Why should we believe death lasts forever? Astrophysicist Katie Mack on whether time travel's possible and how time will end. And speaking of the enigmatic and unexplainable, world-renowned illusionist Scott Sylvan on his spellbinding show that's coming to Tamaki Makaurau. I'm Susie Ferguson. Join me this Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Taihape. Cloudy with scattered showers, clearing from Wairarapa and Taihape this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning, then becoming fine. For the remainder of the North Island, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and evening north of Taumaru Nui, and again tomorrow in Northland. Buller, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. Isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Westland and Fiordland, fine, but a few showers in Fiordland, turning to rain tonight. Rain spreading north tomorrow afternoon with heavy falls in the evening. North Otago and Dunedin, cloudy with the odd shower today, fine tomorrow, but a few spots of rain at night. Central Otago, Clutha and Southland, fine with high cloud, scattered rain developing for a time this evening and again tomorrow evening. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, rain developing this evening, then easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. The time is coming up to 7 minutes past 6. I will have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ukraine is accusing Moscow of deliberately jeopardising the lives of prisoners of war in a dispute over a downed Russian military plane. Russia's defence ministry has accused Ukrainian forces of shooting down the plane, which it says was carrying 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war to a prisoner swap. Ukrainian officials haven't confirmed or denied Russia's claims about the crash. The ABC's Nell Whitehead has more.
Russia has accused Ukraine of shooting down a military transport plane in its border region of Belgorod. Its defence ministry says Ukraine launched missiles from across the border, killing all 75 people aboard, including 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war. It says the Ukrainians were being transferred for a prisoner exchange. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has called for an emergency UN Security Council session, calling the crash a criminal act.
Ukrainian prisoners of war were transported to the Belgorod region for the next exchange agreed upon between Moscow and Kiev. Instead of this exchange taking place, the Ukrainian side from the Kharkiv region launched an anti-aircraft missile attack on this plane, which became fatal.
Russia hasn't offered any evidence, and officials in Ukraine haven't confirmed or denied the accusations. But Kyiv admits that a prisoner swap was planned, and its military intelligence said it hadn't been told to ensure safe airspace, as on previous occasions. In his nightly broadcast, President Volodymyr Zelensky said it was Russia who put the prisoners' lives at risk.
It's evident that the Russians are playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners, with the feelings of their families, and with the emotions of our society. It's necessary to establish all clear facts to the extent possible, considering that the plane crash occurred on Russian territory beyond our control.
The US has said it's trying to get more information on what happened. Francis Farrell is a journalist with the Ukrainian English language newspaper, the Kyiv Independent. He says it's hard to verify what happened.
What the Ukrainians said was that if there was going to be this exchange of prisoners of war, which they admitted that that was the plan, then the responsibility for the safety of the prisoners of war that you're taking to be exchanged should be your responsibility. And so if we're talking about travel by air in an area very close to the border, which is in a way an active front line between the two sides, then of course there's going to be a threat of that military plane being shot down by enemy air defense. And it's completely possible that that has happened, that Ukrainian air defense has seen a Russian military plane flying around close to its border and has shot it down. But I mean, I think the Ukrainians were right in saying that that's Russia's responsibility, because if they don't notify the Ukrainians that we're going to be flying around with your prisoners, then that kind of thing can happen because there's a war going on.
With Russia's war in Ukraine approaching its third year, Russia's air attacks have intensified, with Ukraine warning its forces are suffering from a shortage of ammunition.
The Israeli army has cut off southern Gaza's main hospitals and closed a significant escape route for hundreds of thousands of civilians who have been sheltering in Khan Yunis, according to Palestinian health officials. The UN estimates more than 75% of Gaza's population have been displaced, and that is up to 1.7 million people. Israel has also denied reports its tanks are responsible for strikes on a UN compound in Khan Yunis, causing mass casualties, including 9 fatalities. And thousands of people sheltering in hospitals in the city are now reportedly trapped where they are, with Israeli troops encircling the city, effectively cutting off access. Jonathan Cricks works for UNICEF, the United Nations Emergency Fund for Children. He is in Gaza and joins us now. Hello, Jonathan. Can you tell us exactly where you are and what you have seen of conditions?
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm in Rafah, which is very close to the Egyptian border. I'm 4 kilometers away from the place where intense fighting is taking place. And I arrived just yesterday. What I can tell you is that it's absolutely striking to see the number of makeshift tents that are everywhere, hundreds and hundreds of those tents, and I see the children who are hungry. They are really without any resources. And as UNICEF, we are very, very concerned because the issue of the lack of food, the lack of water, the issue of the intensity of the bombardments, all this is becoming absolutely unbearable for the children who are recently displaced. Just to give you an example, the children who have moved recently in the south of the Gaza Strip, they have 1.5 liters of water maximum per day, and that is to drink, to cook, and for hygiene. So the situation is really devastating.
Jonathan, what does that mean for secondary health issues like diseases in the camps?
Well, the combined effect of that lack of water, that lack of food, and if you combine that to the extremely dire situation when it comes to hygiene, it's a complete recipe for a massive spreading of the waterborne diseases. So just in December, during 2-3 weeks in December, the number of cases of chronic diarrhea increased from 40,000 to 70,000 just in a few weeks. So chronic diarrhea, let's keep in mind that is the first cause of mortality for children among children below the age of 5 years old. So it's extremely concerning. And we have also reports of spreading of hepatitis A, which is also a very legal and concerning issue for UNICEF.
Jonathan, does UNICEF have any idea of the number of children who have lost parents in this conflict?
So we can only make estimates, but the estimate we make is that more than 19,000 are unaccompanied or separated children. We have met many of these children who sometimes are brought to an hospital. They are in shock or too young to even tell their name. And the situation of these children is absolutely dramatic because without parents, without people taking care of them, they are among the most vulnerable children here in the Gaza Strip.
How much pressure is it putting on resources as people are having to move yet again, displaced people, as the fighting and the concentration of fighting moves as well?
Well, it's the number, the estimate of the number of people who have arrived in the area of Rafah is approximately 1.5 million. And I mean, we have to realize how small that territory is. Without sanitation, without toilets, without any kind of tap water, these people are living in tents. It's a huge sand field filled up with tents and people living in very difficult situation. There is very limited amount of food. We are also very concerned about malnutrition. The situation is categorized as catastrophic, severe, acute malnutrition situation. So those children have literally nothing. So UNICEF and other UN agencies, we are bringing in water, we're bringing food, we're bringing medical supplies for the injured children, but these supplies are not enough. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the New Zealand the New Zealand population was supporting UNICEF in its efforts to try to provide that humanitarian aid.
When you say there's 1.5 million people who have been displaced and are now living in Rafah, what are these people actually eating? What kind of food do they have access to on a daily basis if food is short?
So we made some surveys, and most of these people are basically eating bread. So what we have still a few bakeries which are running, and humanitarian aid includes flour, and that flour is used to make bread. But beyond bread, you know, when I was driving in Gaza yesterday, I could see that you have all supermarkets are closed, of course. You have small shops which are selling some fruits and some vegetables, but you can see on the quantity on the tables that there is almost nothing available. And the biggest issue is that the prices have skyrocketed, and that means that for the most vulnerable people, they simply cannot afford it.
What about access to hospital care in parts of Gaza? And we've been hearing in Khan Yunis that the hospitals are not reachable because of where the Israeli tanks are. What about where you are? Are people able to get medical attention?
So the situation in terms of health is a major issue. So the overall situation of the hospital in the Gaza Strip is that approximately 2/3 of the hospitals are not functioning. Most of them are functioning with 200-300%, completely overcrowded. So this is a situation where it is absolutely important, and UNICEF and all the UN organizations are doing it. We are repeating consistently to all parties to this conflict that civilian infrastructures like schools, like hospitals, should not be targeted, should not be used for any kind of military purposes. And that is absolutely crucial, because we have reports of many children who are injured. We had several children who are in intensive care in many hospitals, and it's extremely difficult to evacuate them. It's literally impossible to evacuate them due to their conditions or due to the security conditions. So this is alarming.
Jonathan, how concerned are you that the international community are getting crisis fatigue, that they're going to turn away from this because it's too much?
Well, I understand, and at the same time, being here and seeing, just one child. I mean, we have met with Omar. He's 11 years old. He has lost his dad, his mum, his twin brother. He's been taken care by his aunt. They're living in a tent, and Omar, he's always closing his eyes. And why is he closing his eyes? Is because this is the only way he can still see the faces of his parents. and he's scared to lose that image of his parents. And I think that empathy and humanity must prevail in the face of this extreme catastrophe.
Thank you for your time, Jonathan. That is Jonathan Cricks, who's with UNICEF, joining us live there from Rafah in Gaza. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Most Australian taxpayers are in for an $800 bonus under tax cuts announced by the Prime Minister this afternoon. Anthony Albanese has made major changes to his government's planned program, which will halve tax cuts for the highest earners. The overhaul of the plan has been described as a broken promise by the opposition, but Albanese says the changes will help those most affected by the cost of living crisis.
Australians are looking for more help. Australians deserve more help, and today I can confirm that more help is on the way. Today I announce that from the 1st of July this year, our government will deliver a tax cut for every single Australian taxpayer. All 13.6 million taxpayers, not just some.
Under the plan, Anthony Albanese says all Australians will now pay less tax on the first $45,000 they earn.
The average wage in Australia is $73,000. A person earning that will now get a tax cut of more than $1,500 a year, more than double what they would have got under the plan put forward by Scott Morrison. Consider a full-time worker earning $100,000 a year. They will get a tax cut of over $2,100. Over $800 more for these middle income earners because of our changes.
And that is Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Now, staying in Australia, Cyclone Kirrily is closing in on North Queensland on the coast there and has intensified into a Category 2 system. Wind speeds are picking up and coastal communities are bracing for what is to come. Businesses and schools are closed, with residents sandbagging and making final preparations before the system hits. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
It's an anxious wait for many Queenslanders as the unwanted visitor makes her presence felt. Rob Davis lives in Cannonvale, just near Airlie Beach.
I woke up this morning and just looked out my window and saw that there was wind. And then now that I've come out onto the balcony, I can see that that there's a constant, probably 15, 20 knots, and now and with the gusts coming through, it goes to 35 easy.
35 knots is about 65 kilometres an hour, but there's a lot more of that to come.
We expect that there'll be sufficient and certainly an ample breezes to start breaking limbs on trees by this afternoon.
The Weather Bureau has upgraded Cyclone Kirrily to a Category 2 system. Senior forecaster Laura Burkle says it will continue to strengthen.
Tropical Cyclone Kirrily is now a Category 2 system as of 10 a.m. this morning. It's situated approximately 420 kilometres northeast of Townsville.
The state's disaster coordinator is Deputy Commissioner Shane Chileppi. He says emergency authorities are ready for Kirrily.
We've got considerable resources deployed, not just police, but what we've got is some swiftwater rescue technicians, well over 100 now situated right through the state by the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. We've got extra police deployed. We've got emergency services personnel. Our SES are ready to go. And also we're looking for the post crossing. So Energy Queensland have already staged significant resources in the Rockhampton area so that we can move them north immediately.
Deputy Commissioner Chileppi is urging Queenslanders in the at-risk zone to think about how they'll fare when the cyclone hits.
If you don't feel that you're going to be safe in your home, whether it be from wind, rain, flooding, it's probably time today, during the hours of daylight, to make that decision and move to one of our evacuation centres or cyclone shelters in the area.
Townsville Mayor Jenny Hill wants her community to stay alert.
We will be sending out emergency alerts to our community, advising them to begin sheltering in place from 2 p.m. today. That's when we're expected to see wind gusts of above 80 kilometres an hour.
Queensland Premier Stephen Miles says all that can be done has been done.
We're prepared and ready for the worst. Now we wait and hope for the best. Our message to Queenslanders is now is the time to make sure that you're ready. Make sure your emergency kit is stocked. Make sure that you have enough essential items to potentially have to get through days without power.
For residents across North Queensland like Rob Davis, it'll be a long night.
Tonight will be probably the time where we will be constantly checking maps and looking outside to see if everything's okay. And during Debbie, it sort of was just seriously bad through the night. You could hardly hear yourself shout with the noise. So along with all the breeze comes this terrible increase in rattling trees and groaning buildings and things. So I don't think it's going to get that bad, but we'll certainly be aware of that when it starts to happen.
So, some time for your feedback now on the story of Ratty McRatface, as I like to call it. This is the pest problem in a Dunedin supermarket. A number of you want to know specifically which one. Dunedin South Countdown, 323 Andersons Bay Road. They acknowledge that they've got a problem, but they say they've got a pest control company that is dealing with it. One listener, though, says the countdown should be closed down immediately. Food supplies, massive health hazard, exclamation marks. Thoroughly cleaned and de-ratted before allowed to reopen. Those are not raisins in the coleslaw, darling. Oh, my goodness. Duncan's hitting us up. Is this a case of rat shaming, calling him chubby? I think you find that the person who saw the rat said by the looks of him or her, they were living their best ratty life. And Jim has got in touch to say rats are everywhere through the food chain. The ingredients in your sealed packages have most likely come in contact with rats, mice, and insects at some stage. Cheers, says Jim. No, cheers to you, Jim, for that, right on dinner time. And to follow any good rat story, one about a kitty cat. It was a cat fight at a cat show, but it wasn't between two felines. The cat attacked one of the judges, hissing, slapping and swiping at the veteran judge. CNN's Jenny Moose reports.
They get stroked, they get lifted, they get stretched, they get their tails touched. No wonder a 2-year-old named Ludwig von Beethoven lost his composure. He even slapped the judge. Veteran Judge Vicky Nye says she fondly refers to the video
as the Black Cat Smackdown.
The pedigreed show cats are accustomed to the commotion of a show like this one in Mesa, Arizona, organized by the Cat Fanciers Association. But Beethoven was a first-timer competing in the household pet category.
That one was just terrifying. When you see the eyes going like that.
And though Vicky gave him plenty of compliments,
beautiful coat, shiny, nice green eyes,
Beethoven turned on her, though the judge didn't even get scratched.
I need the owner now.
Contestant 177 in the background was freaked. Did you actually attack a judge? Vicky says she's only been bitten twice in 35 years of judging. Okay, so this slap may not compare with, say, the famous Oscar slap. Cats have gone ballistic on everyone from reporters.
The couple is going to have to come right
to a guy.
He's a very loving cat.
Trying to get a shelter cat adopted. So loving, he bit the guy perilously close to his crotch. As for Beethoven... So this cat did not get a ribbon?
No, that kitty was actually disqualified.
His owner said sorry, but for the feline Beethoven, the cat show seemed more cacophony than symphony.
Oh my goodness, that is some serious catitude. Now, that is pretty much all we have time for this evening. The Late News team, as always, is going to keep you updated throughout the night, so do stay tuned in. If you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahia popo, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, first up takes the plunge with a German cliff diving competitor as she prepares for a big jump into Auckland's Viaduct Harbour. You need nerves of steel for this one. Do tune in, 5 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch you a little later in the day. Enjoy your evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission will gather evidence at the site where a Fiordland tourist cruise ship ran aground last night. Investigations show the hull of Real NZ's Fiordland Navigator was breached in Doubtful Sound and it took on water. A renters advocacy group says the government isn't doing enough to enforce healthy home standards. Renters United says cold and damp homes are surprisingly common, but tenants are hesitant to speak out. A 10-year-old girl from Australia has died after being swept down a creek in Fiordland National Park. And Niwa says Cyclone Kirili, which is bearing down on far north Queensland, could intensify the rainfall expected to hit New Zealand this weekend. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This morning on First Up, we met the man behind the 8th annual New Zealand Pinball Champs.
This is the culmination of it. I've got about 100 in my house, so everything's got a story behind it, but at the end of the day, hey, just pinball machines, so out they go. Got to be ruthless, otherwise you're just a hoarder.
And a community driving service in Hawke's Bay's Waipukaro that helps people get behind the wheel is proving popular.
We started with a very humble couple of borrowed cars and started teaching people to drive. We had to go over to Dannyvert to get a licence, and now it's a bit of a 5-day operation, 3 cars, and we have the ability to do the testing now in our own community and access to our own testing officers.
Buckle up, then download First Up the podcast or join me, Nathan Rarere, weekday mornings live from 5 on RNZ National.
Right now, you're with me, Evie Ashton, through to 7 o'clock on Trending Now. If you want to get a handle on emotional eating, paying close attention to the experience itself will be more effective than trying to summon willpower. That's according to addiction psychiatrist and neuroscientist Dr. Judd Brewer. Here's a kōrero between Dr. Brewer and Susana Leatawa on the weekend.
You're a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist. Are you also an automatic eater?
To some degree, yes. I certainly have counted myself amongst certain unhelpful eating habits, including consuming way too much of certain types of foods.
So when we talk about automatic eating, could you give an explainer? How would you describe an automatic eater?
Yeah, we describe it as, eating without awareness as a place to start. And then to subcategorize that, there can be the joke about I'm on a seafood diet, I see food and I eat it. So there's an automatic eating type of behavior. There can be the person that can't pass up a bowl of candy or M&Ms or, some type of a thing in somebody's candy dish. There's the person that automatically eats while they're watching television or watching a movie, even though they're not hungry.